was tasked with.
Not here. Late.
We good, Mr. Hood? Good afternoon. It is Monday, March 2, 2020. This is the regular meeting, monthly meeting of the Transportation Commission for the City of Meridian. Time out while I silence my phone. I don't have $5 with me, so don't find me. Okay. Roll call. Ballard's here. Mr. McKinney? Here. Ryan Lancaster?
Here.
Ryan Hall is absent. Tracy Hopkins is absent. Stephen Lewis?
Here.
Tom LeClaire?
Here.
Joseph Leckie? Here. Luke Kavanaugh? Here. Sean Martin?
Here.
Tony Tisdale? Ian Updike? Melissa Taysom?
Here.
Justin Price?
Here.
Very good, thank you. Item 2, adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would propose that we swap the order of 5B and 5C so that we have our presentation before we get into the sausage making of project prioritization.
We want to bump up C one notch.
Yes, please.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any other maneuverings? Seeing none, item 2, agenda's been adopted. Item 3, approval of the minutes. We'll take a minute to I scanned them quickly, but maybe not as thoroughly as I should. Mr. Lewis, did you see anything?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Page 7,
Page 7.
at the bottom, the last paragraph, the second line of the last paragraph, where it talks about 5 feet to 5.5, I think those values are swapped. I think it should read from 5.5 to 5.
That's my recollection.
That was all I found in the minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Does anyone agree, disagree? Okay. That's a motion to, 5 should be 5.5, the first number, and the second number should be 5.
Yes.
Okay? There's a second on approving the minutes with that amendment.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item 3. Item 4, old business item, transportation projects update. Mr. Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The transportation project update begins on page 10 of your packet. And as I typically do, I've bolded new information since last month. I think the first one I want to call to your attention, so again, I'm not going to read the memo to you, but the first one I want to call to your attention is on page 3. There's actually a couple there on page 12. I guess that's a sub-page 3 because it's labeled there as well. Locust Grove, Victory to Overland. So there was some discussion last Tuesday. Mr. Lucas, who's in the audience, was there. Brian McClure is our point of contact serving on the ACHD project team there. Some discussion about the cross-section of this mile of Locust Grove that's almost done being designed at this point. They had some concerns, some comments on the cross-section being proposed. I just wanted to loop you in there a little bit, and I think there's still maybe a little bit of fine-tuning to go on, but generally what I heard from the council, and we have a council member obviously participating, but my understanding is going forward in a lot of these, for lack of a better term, suburban type of contexts, moving to more of a detached multi-use pathway instead of a striped or buffered bike lane on street. It seems like our demographic doesn't really, those 5.5 foot or so bike lanes don't oftentimes serve our community. And again, our makeup being a lot of time, more for recreational than for commuting purposes. But in a lot of these projects going forward, it sounds like our baseline for Meridian, what we'd request, again, some context sensitive here, but a detached multi-use pathway. So combining bikes and pedestrians into one joint use facility, generally about 10 feet wide, is something we're going to be looked to ACHD to ask them to build into their projects instead of a striped or otherwise buffered bike lane that is adjacent to the travel lanes and the curb. So we can have a conversation about that if you'd like. It's more of a heads up at this point. And again, I think we need a little bit of discussion, more of a discussion and some fine tuning on that. And I don't think this is a one size fits all. It's not every single project we're going to get or even want this multi-use pathway. But in situations similar to Locust Grove, this Locust Grove project, it is something that at least staff is under the impression that we're going to ask ACHD to work with us on designing those for multi-use facilities. So there will be a letter sent to ACHD. I will probably include that next month because it's not, as far as I know, it hasn't actually been sent yet. So I'll send you that letter when it goes out from the mayor and all of council. The draft I saw had all of council's signature line on it, so that may be why it hasn't been sent out yet, because not all of council signed it. So just a heads up on that one. Fairview, Locust Grove. So this is one, couple things. This is one to kind of my point on multi-use pathways. This one doesn't make sense to necessarily put a multi-use pathway in if the scope of the Fairview Locust Grove project includes widening of Fairview Avenue between Eagle and Locust Grove. A multi-use pathway really probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There's not a whole lot of use there today as a corridor for recreational purposes. So a bike lane with a 5-foot attached, detached, 7-foot attached sidewalk will probably suffice there. But the main point for this one was I did include at least the draft schedule of the project. And we'll talk about that a little bit here later. So if you hadn't had a chance before this meeting, maybe if you can kind of catch up, and we'll jump right into that when the time comes. Under the new business items, we'll talk about that scope and any concerns you may have with some of the initial design concept project. Moving on to page.
Caleb, can I ask a question before we go on? Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. On that Fairview, Locust Grove to Eagle, if the scope is increasing significantly, I would presume that means the budget is also increasing accordingly. Is that something, so is the council essentially coming back to ACHD and asking them to do more, or is this ACHD that's considering this?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McKinney. So this was at the project level when we went to within, I think it was our first kickoff meeting, scoping meeting for this project at just the intersection. The question was brought up: project limits. How far do you go with this project? And when you start looking to the east, it's like, well, you've got the makings of a 7-lane facility on both eastbound and westbound for a good chunk of this. Why don't we just look at widening it the whole way? So kind of as a project team, we brought that up as a potential, and then ACHD staff took it to their commission and concurred with that. I don't know exactly how it's going to be funded or when that's going to work, but it's at least going to be designed at the same time. There will be 2 project numbers, but it'll be done concurrently, basically. So it is from ACHD. It's not a city request necessarily. It was something that kind of organically through the process of designing the intersection was like, hey, there's an opportunity here. It could make some sense to go ahead and not just look at the intersection, but look at the intersection plus.
So is it like they may design the entire thing all at once, but it may be actually built in 2 separate projects, possibly separated by a year or 2 or 3? Is that kind of the direction it's headed?
So the meetings I've been at, that has not been the intent. It could happen that way because again, it's not in the 5-year work plan. That's the kind of the kickoff to that process. It could be staged that way and built that way, though. Yes, in separate phases, but I think a lot of folks were talking about the benefits of doing it concurrently, not just with design, but even construction. Because construction traffic, there's some benefits too if you just do the whole project kind of concurrently. But I think a lot of that is still to be determined.
Okay, thanks.
So then on to, I guess that's actually the only updates I had written down. There were a couple of other things that I wanted to highlight. There are a couple of other updates that I wanted to provide you, though. I did get an update from ACHD on the Cherry Library pedestrian crossing. That is not in your notes, but I wanted to let you know that should begin later this month as well. So that's the pedestrian crossing there, mid-block, between 8th and Linder on Cherry Lane, kind of the ball fields to Meridian Middle School. There's a mid-block crossing that'll be put in there later this month. And then I wanted to circle back. I meant to write this down, but I didn't, and I apologize. Safety busing. So last month, you all asked me to carry forward the request for the school district to continue safety busing even after the construction along Taconic Drive. So this is Eagle, on the west side of Eagle, south of Amity, the safety busing to Hillsdale Elementary. So I carried that forward. Council agreed that made some sense to ask the school district to continue safety busing. Real similar discussion to what we had is what's the protocol to do that? Do you petition? Do you ask? Is it a letter? How do you do this? There's no real process set up for that. It's just something that sort of happens at the school district level. And so there was a joint meeting this last month, and the council did bring that up to them face-to-face with their trustees and our council and requested that. Essentially, they said, that's enough. We don't have a form you fill out or a letter we need necessarily. So they'll take it into consideration, whatever that means. They didn't say they would. They didn't say they wouldn't. But we're on record anyways as petitioning them, if you will, to continue that safety busing. So I just wanted to circle back on that real quickly. So it's unfortunate Mr. Kavanaugh's here because he's the one that was a large part of that conversation because he's sort of been tracking it through this venue, but maybe we'll put him on the spot later if you have any follow-up questions on that one. So that is everything that I wanted to kind of point out under old business or updates there, and I will stand for any questions you may have.
Questions, comments for Mr. Hood, commissioners? Lancaster, you grabbing for the mic?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I guess I am interested in, I know Caleb talked about this on the Locust Grove Victory to Overland bicycle and pedestrian facilities, but I guess I'm still looking for more. I'm wanting more, whether that comes when we, when Councilman Kavanagh gets back to the room or when we talk about, 5E?
B?
Oh, 5E,
5E?
future role of Transportation Commission. I find this interesting. So I recognize that we have new, at least partially new elected officials in the city. So I guess I'm interested more what the letter says, how this came about, why it came up at all. And I'm going to ask the question again. This seems like I don't know if it's a policy decision or Caleb mentioned that it's project specific, but it sounded like there might be interest in doing similar things going forward. And again, that's something that, at least unless I totally missed it, hasn't been brought to the commission. So I guess I'm interested in that topic further. I'm left wanting more.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can, and we can talk about it under role of commission, but maybe just a little bit more of that. So I did update you probably 2 or 3 months ago that's what was moving forward with ACHD through the design process. It did just this last Tuesday kind of flare up, if you will, or rear up as a policy. So that is it's hot off the press, if you will. I mean, this is something that is basically, and that's why I wanted to share it with you, is there's this letter that is leaning towards a new baseline for the city of Meridian requesting this multi-use pathway. So that's why I'm daylighting it with you now. But as far as the project is concerned, I have been updating you on that and mentioned through the public involvement meetings, kind of split, the folks that are right adjacent to the corridor really don't like, the 5-lane roadway coming up into their backyards, and what can we do to kind of keep that right away there. But this is the first time where it's been kind of more of an overarching policy, hey, we prefer multi-use pathways to bike lanes and sidewalks. So we can have more conversation. I just wanted to at least close that portion of the loop right now on, for this project, it was a project issue that is turning into a policy discussion. So that's kind of how it's evolving.
Any other comments for Mr. Hood? Questions?
No,
We'll reserve your question, Mr. Lancaster. If Mr. Kavanaugh returns, I'll note for the record that Tony Tisdale arrived at 3:55. Okay, old business item transportation projects update. Looks like 4A is completed. Moving on to 5A, Sergeant Brandon Fraser, sir. Went
Good
from yellow
afternoon.
to blue uniforms. Is there a change of the?
Yes, thank you for noticing. I prefer blue. Looks less like an insect and more like a police officer. Yeah, all of our traffic officers changed to a blue uniform. It's what our SROs wear. And ironically, and this is kind of off point, but I find it funny, we used to wear a yellow shirt, the thought being that it was high visibility. However, the yellow shirt was not ANSI compliant. You still had to put a yellow vest on over the yellow shirt in order to comply with certain regulations while working on state highways or highways receiving federal dollars anyway. The one piece of information I have for you, I'm sure you've heard at the state level, a little less than a week ago, the Senate passed House bill that is basically a prohibition on hands-free device usage throughout the state. It is somewhat similar to the Meridian ordinance. That bill still has to go before the House. It passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. It's expected to draw a little bit more ire from the House side. We'll see how that goes. If that goes into law, which it could July 1st, it would essentially put a 6-month moratorium on local government enforcement of codes or ordinances because, number one, the state law supersedes existing local laws. There's a prohibition in the law as well that make it so local governments can't make similar laws. The state law would be supreme. And in the state law, there's wording that there'll be a 6-month educational campaign that will kind of contain the same things that our educational campaign did with billboards and radio advertisements and things of that nature to get things on board statewide. So we'll see what happens there. Other than that, we are entering our busy time of year. When the sun's out, things get busier for my office. Unfortunately, over the weekend, as I'm sure you're aware from the news, we had a motorcycle fatality crash on Eagle Road. It's very unfortunate. Just remember when you see friends and people that you work with to remind them to look out for motorcyclists because when the sun's out, they start to come out more and more. We've had a couple of those within the last year, which are not good, and too many fatal crashes within the last 12-month period. But as we continue to grow, it's an unfortunate reality that we're facing. I've been working with Caleb in the mayor's office about these transportation priority projects, and they also go hand in hand with the infrastructure in police services and things that we need in order to get to other parts of town, which is something that a lot of people don't think of. When you talk about these improvements on Locust Grove and Fairview and even up around the Chinden corridor, 10-mile Meridian, McMillan, Eustic, those are roads that we need to have expanded transportation capability on so that we can get places. Right now, the hardest place for us to get in the city is the northwest corner. And as we stand here today, Chinden and Highway 16 is a long ways away. And sometimes it does take a while to get up there, so we're constantly moving our resources across our patrol division to meet the needs of the calls for service up there. Our northwest substation will help with that as well, the improvements that are discussed here. Other than that, that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
Questions for Sergeant Fraser?
I have a question,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman. Sergeant, what's the exact location of that northwest substation?
It's in the northeast corner of Chinden and Highway 16 is where it's slated to be. Not right at the intersection. There's a mixed-use development that's going in there, and it kind of borders up against the bluff there where it drops off into the Boise River Valley.
Is that, if I recall, is that where there's a medical type
Correct.
development going in there?
There's a hospital going in there, retirement facility,
Okay.
several other things, and we'll have a police and fire substation up there.
And what's the timing for that being completed?
Well, I know they broke ground on the project overall. We've heard ambitious estimates that would put us occupying that building about a year and a half out. Other estimates would be closer to the 3-year range. My instinct is that it will be a 2 to 3 years, and we'll be occupying that substation up there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Sergeant Frazier, I know it's preliminary and you may not be able to, but this motorcycle fatality, does it fit within the conversations we've had, turning on a yellow light, distracted driving, speed, or?
No, this one has most to do with the fact that people get in a hurry and checking blind spots and things like that. Motorcycles are way smaller than cars, and they're a little bit easier to miss, and that's the dynamics of this crash.
Okay, very good, I appreciate that.
Yep.
Well, I was going to ask you, with the blue and yellow, is that the travel colors, or is that the home field colors?
It's travel and home now.
All right, very good, sir.
Thank you.
For coming in. Okay, we moved you up 5C to B, North Meridian Bike and Pedestrian Neighborhood Plan, Addiston, Batistia. Close did I come, sir? How close did I come on your last name?
Close enough.
Close enough?
Yes. So, good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Edinson Bautista, ACHG Senior Transportation Planner. In today's meeting, I wanted to present a presentation we presented to the Meridian Council members for the North Meridian Neighborhood Bike and Pedestrian Plan project. The North Meridian Neighborhood Plan is the 13th of a series. This graph displays ACHD level of completion for the neighborhood plans that have been adopted, including the Eagle Neighborhood Plan and the VMP Whitewater Park Neighborhood Plan that were both adopted on October 23rd, 2019. This graph reflects that once these neighborhood plans are adopted, there is an ongoing process of working the projects identified into the plans. As of now, ACHD has completed 258 projects and 131 projects currently programmed in the Integrated Firework Plan. The North Meridian area is highlighted in this slide. This slide polygon delineated the planning area. The planning area is generally follows the north, but in the north, Chinden Boulevard and the Boise River, south, Highway I-84, east, following the city limits, and west, Canada Road and McDermott Road. The neighborhood plans aim to achieve the following objectives: identify and map the biking and walking destination as it pertains to the planning areas. Through a robust public outreach process, identify the needs for connectivity, transit, biking, and walking facilities to gather a general consensus for community recommendations. Develop a user-friendly plan that communicates existing conditions and need, as well as convey proposals of projects to both the public and ACHD. Through our analysis, technical review, and public outreach, define, prioritize, and rank projects that address the needs identified. Additionally, we will identify existing gaps in the sidewalk and bicycle network. Throughout this process, we aim to brand the neighborhood plan to ensure recognition throughout the community of these planning efforts, and ACHG continued commitment to bike and pedestrian improvement. So, as you can see, this objective will help feedback that effort, that task that you guys have today through the community program project prioritization, and identify projects, biking and bicycle and walking and pedestrian projects that will later go into the community program and will help the city as well as ACHDs to identify and prioritize those sort of projects.
Very good.
Through standard neighborhood plan procedure, public outreach is conducted in 3 different stages. Through student outreach, we work with students in the planning area to identify any concerns or recommendations they have regarding the routes to and from schools. We also hold a public open house. North Meridian will have 2 to identify the general public needs and recommendation. Throughout the process, we also hold pop-up meetings to address any specific concerns that are raised through the public open house. Our next steps include during this month all the way to June, we will conduct public outreach and identify bike and pedestrian needs. On July, we will present to the ACHD Commission and City of Meridian the draft project list. On August, a refinement of the plan report, and on September, present to the ACHD Commission for adoption hearing. With this, I conclude this presentation, and I will stand for any questions.
Good. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Batista?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. McKinney?
I have a question. This kind of relates back to just a few moments ago. We were talking about bike paths and detached bike pathways versus, those striped on the roadways and so on. Is that public outreach going to involve discussion with, with citizens, with students and others, which types of bike facilities they prefer, or is it simply just going to look at routes?
So the main objective is looking into the routes that the community walk or bike throughout the Meridian area. We through the roadways and bikeway master plan, we have identified those type of treatments that we would recommend is according to a specific matrix that goes back into the speeds and the volumes of each road. Through that matrix that help us identify through the projects what treatment it's needed for each of the road in regards to bicycle projects. So we use both documents to through the project identification provide a recommendation for design of each project. So we provide that recommendation on it. We also through this document, depending on the community feedback, we have concepts. We can recommend concept studies that can go into further details to define what type of treatments are needed for each location.
Okay, so it sounds like primarily the intent is to get from the public feedback about where they want bike paths to be, not particularly what kind of bike paths they want. Instead, ACHD already has, you say, a matrix for deciding what kind of bike paths go in what kind of areas. Am I hearing that correctly?
Correct. So through the matrix, that's a high level analysis that later goes into more detail during design.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Batista? Very good, sir, and I always will leave it open, give you an outstanding invitation to return. If you would like to bring other information before us, we're always happy to have you back, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. 5B, 2020 roadways, intersections, and community programs priorities.
Mr. Chair, I won't spend too much time, I don't think, on the microphone, but I do have 2 things that I want to put before you under this item. So the first one is basically a ratification of what I heard from you last month, and that has to do with the priorities for roadways and intersections. Hopefully you had a chance to look at the Excel spreadsheet, the updated Excel spreadsheet that was sent to you on Friday. I did print off, I think there's 5 or 6 copies, so there should be enough for most of you to have. I said in that email I'd bring some hard copies, so there are some there. If we need more, let me know, and I'll go burn another copy. I also want to share with you a map that I think we can work from as well. May help. So can you all see that? Did that pop up? Yeah. So this is that same Excel spreadsheet basically on a map. So I've got the intersections and road layers on right now to look at that, and then when we get to community programs priorities, I can turn that layer on instead. So this also just helps to show where those projects are, hotspots, how you want to look at them. This is something that we think helps tell the story too about, again, where maybe some of that need is, or at least if you want to look at geographic equity in projects or other things, you can use this map to also see how those play out. So this has been updated as well based on those conversations on roadways and intersections. So is there anything, did I miss anything there? Did I hear you correctly in the direction on roadways and intersections?
Mr. Lewis?
Mr. Chairman, I was fine with what was presented by Mr. Hood.
Are you looking for a resolution, a motion, Mr. Hood, or?
So yeah, Mr. Chair, up to you. I mean, we can do it in one fell swoop at the end, or if we want to just be done with this, a motion would be great if you're ready for that, and then maybe one from community programs, or again, if you want to endorse the whole thing. We do need to make it through this today, though. We can't wait another month. We do need to get this to ACHD by March 20th, and I have to share this with council, so that only really gives them 2 meetings to talk about this. So I am planning on discussing with them next Tuesday. So I'm prepared if you're prepared. I would like a motion sometime during this discussion, though.
Mr. Lewis, I think we ought to approve last month's in the priority listing.
I agree. I move that we approve the roadways and intersections portion of the prioritization as presented.
And that's a second from you, Mr. Lancaster?
Not yet, no.
Oh,
I'll second.
need
The motion.
discussion, Mr. Lancaster?
Yes, discussion, please.
All
So
right.
I don't, I think that's fine. I don't want to go back to what we, rehash what we did last month. So my question, though, before I vote, is in light of what Sergeant Frazier just told us, so he's interested in some projects for policing purposes. So my question then, and perhaps Mr. Hood is best to answer this, but did police have a chance to look at the list that we made last month? And if so, what was the outcome of that?
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lancaster, I've not made a special, I didn't reach out to Sergeant Frazier or anybody else in police to discuss that. He had the same amount of time you did. I sent it to him with the packet, but did not reach out to him and offer to meet and discuss those projects individually. I will note, though, sort of on those lines, Mr. Updike and myself have communicated, and we are sitting down to talk about community programs, but I did not do that with police.
Okay,
Shall I call for the vote?
that's fine with me, Mr. Chairman.
All in favor of approving our ranking from last month for roadways and intersections? Is that correct, Mr. Lewis? Yep. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Moving on then to Phase 2, that would be the communities.
Yeah, and so, Mr. Chair, this really is the same lists as last year with a couple of new projects added to the end. So we didn't get to this last month, so this is all brand new, but it's really a similar process. Let me put the map up so you can kind of see what they look like here. And I can pull up this Excel spreadsheet too if that's what you all would rather see than a map, but I can zoom in. I've got an aerial map up as well that we can use if folks don't know where that project actually is. These are a little bit more difficult because some of the roads are collectors or even local streets sometimes. So just let me know how you'd like to proceed, but looking for some direction. And again, ultimately an endorsement of a list to move on to council.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster?
I have a question before we get too far into it, but Mr. Hood just mentioned that he is meeting with future tense with Mr. Updike to compare lists with the school district. Am I understanding that right, that that's
Correct.
future tense, not past tense?
I
Okay,
have not met as of yet.
okay. Yeah, it'd be nice if Mr. Updike were here so we could compare lists too, but alas, here we are, so. Mr. Chairman, if I can dive right into it.
Please do. How deep is the deep end?
Well, I'm gonna start with just dipping my toe in it. How about that? So right off the top, and I want to make sure we're all going by the same list. So we have a column that says 2020 priority ranking and 2019 priority ranking.
Far left column,
Yeah, so I'm gonna be referring to the 2020 priority ranking.
okay?
But it seems like there's 2 projects in the top 12 that we can cross off immediately.
Okay,
So number 12 says it's completed. And number 6, if I understood correctly, this is going into construction shortly, so it's already made it through the list. So I would propose that we scratch numbers 6 and 12 before we, do anything else.
okay,
So, Mr. Chairman, if I can maybe just
yes.
explain, I'm okay with 6, and sorry I didn't mark that one off. I do want to talk about for a minute, though, the Locust Grove, Paradise, Grand Canyon. This happens every year. As you can see, it says construction completed in 2010. Our request is for concrete sidewalk, not an extruded curb on the asphalt. So ACHD keeps saying that the project is completed, and we keep saying, no, that's not the facility we want there. So if you want to take it off, that's okay, but it's not the project as we requested it. It's not a discontinuous pedestrian way, but it's not the ultimate configuration either. That's why it stayed on our list. So up to you. I can zoom in, but that's essentially what you've got is an extruded curb separating the travel lanes from what essentially is the pathway to school there. So
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. McKay?
Caleb, on that particular item, is that is that between Fairview and Ustick, or is it, let's see. Yeah, is that on Locust Grove between Fairview and Ustick?
I'll pull up the map here. So it's actually south of McMillan, just south of McMillan. So here's Grand Canyon, and you have Discovery Elementary.
Okay, all right.
So you got Discovery, Pathways, Middle School, and it's this section here on the east side of the roadway.
Okay.
In front of these county subdivisions that doesn't have sidewalks.
So this would not be affected by the earlier thing that we were discussing of Locust Grove between Fairview and Ustick, of a widening of the complete thing. This would not be affected by
Correct.
that.
Yeah, this isn't, I don't even believe this section of roadways in the 5-year work plan. It may not even be in the CIP.
Okay,
So
thank you.
again, I just want some clarification. If you all you think that's enough, that's fine, but it's completed in their minds, but it's really not completed in the original request.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster?
in light of that additional information, I propose we keep 12 on the list, so just strike 6 then.
Okay,
But I think we need to make it clear, Caleb, that, what the city's requesting, because
I have, and yeah,
Okay.
I'll clarify that the asphalt path is not, yeah,
Okay.
what's requested.
Mr. Chairman, if I may continue.
you may.
So there's 2 projects, a new one that's currently number 46 in the list, and number 28 that I'd like to discuss further. So number 46, Stockenham Enhanced Crosswalks. This is what I reported on last month from the School Zone Subcommittee.
Yes,
So this was a recommendation that we made there, and so I would like to request that we move that up into the top 10 of our priority list. And then the Main Street, and so this is number 28 now, moving to the second project.
so 46, you want to move to 6? You got a hole there,
Sure, why not?
just saying.
Yeah,
Okay, 28, sir?
28, so this, as I recall, or if I'm making the connection right, this is the project that's mentioned in the staff communications in our packet that Mr. Martin weighed in on, the Main and King intersection.
Okay,
So I propose that we rename that to Main and King. I remember that Sergeant Arnold had done a study there and had reported on that a few months ago, or back last summer, I think, last spring even. So I think that one needs to be renamed to Main and King
Okay.
and moved up into the top 10 as well.
Who are you going to bump down?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So, number 9, Meridian Rail with Trails, I think we need to keep that out of the top 10 still, until there's some foreseeable movement on that. And I think I ask this question annually, but I still wonder why we have numbers 3 and 8 in this list, because they look like roadway projects rather than community program projects. So out of our current top 10, I'd like to see us remove 3, 8, and 9 from the top 10 as well.
Let's look at number 3. It talks about sidewalks, bike lanes, pedestrian crossing. Sounds like community.
So,
Good.
Mr. Chair, so number 3 first. So that one, yeah, I mean, that evolved as essentially a community programs project, and it's sort of the scope changed to, hey, let's make this, a full roadway project as a 3-lane facility. So it does make sense. It is in ACHE's programming as a roadway project, so I don't have any problem. It really just is a, again, I don't want to say it's scope creep, but it originated as a pedestrian concern, and it's like, well, while we're out here, might as well take care of the whole thing and rebuild the road. So we can even, simply remove it, even if, and doesn't even have to stay on this list if you want.
It's a good thing we have Mr. Hood here, because all I have to go on is what is on the paper, and Caleb knows the rest of the story, as Paul
All
Harvey
right,
would
so
say.
if 3 is, if 3 is struck, are you moving up and then slot 28? At about number 9 position there, Mr. Lancaster?
I think that's fine, yeah.
Okay, 28 comes 9. And the rest of them shake out?
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want me to address 8. I believe Commissioner Lancaster also had that one. Again, similar story, although that one I think is more of a roadway type of a need. But again, we received some concerns from folks in that area about getting to the YMCA and those types of facilities over there. So again, with it now having a roadway project number, probably does make sense to not have it be taking up a top 10 type of a spot there in our community programs. But again, a similar evolution where it started off as, hey, really we were hearing not so much about the traffic concerns, but just about the access concerns to get to some of the destinations that are south and east of Tuscany.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. McKinney?
on that same note, then it would seem that the scope of what we show there as item 8 would subsume everything that's under item 47 as well. Or am I, because 46 was the item that Mr. Lancaster talked about, I believe, with respect to the school, but 47 is also pedestrian improvements on Amity, and wouldn't, well, no, I guess that's Eagle Road. No, I guess I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
That's
that one's
really-
more Amity emphasis than Eagle Road emphasis.
Right.
So there is and I put up on your screen, there's a little bit of a gap there along Amity, although we do have a development application coming in for at least the south side of the roadway here that would likely make that connection back to the collector. But yeah, that one's more, again, Amity specific improvements, pedestrian type improvements.
Right, okay, thank you.
Are we striking 8?
I think so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so then you've already, so you've proposed to move 46 to 6, 28 to 9, and then they just move up scale, the ladder?
I'm okay with that.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, can I just clarify, and I don't know if that's going to take a motion or not, but is the intent to leave Meridian Railroad Trail outside the top 10? Because if so, you're going to have a gap. I think still you're one short, right, to either you need to take Second Street and move that up, or East 2.5 Street and move that up above, because I think we're still,
Mr. Lancaster put Railroad 12 to 11,
Yes.
everything bumps up and just put.
okay.
Now, I'm open to changing my mind about that if there's some information about that project moving, but if there's no news, then I think we keep it out of the top 10, so.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm probably the most appropriate person, at least here, to provide an update. I don't have a whole lot of movement or news necessarily, but I will let you know that there is a work group at Compass that is moving, trying to advance this project. They did in fact, I can't remember if Rachel was here, right, a couple months ago and presented they looked at the entire 33-mile corridor between Nampa and East Boise, came up with different, broke it down between what Nampa's segments look like as far as right-of-way needs and cost, and they did, it's like 5 different cross-sections, but really 3 different cross-sections of how wide the asphalt is versus a shoulder, maybe an equestrian path versus benches, and kind of a more urban setting. So there is movement, but it's all at the local level. It's not with UP. There's not, but we are gearing up. The board heard a similar presentation this last Monday. And so some of the next steps are gearing up to start to really sell it or pitch this proposal to UP and Watco. So, but their answer is still no.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think we keep it out of the top 10 until, I'm glad there's things moving until they're accelerating a little bit. I think we keep it out of the top 10.
All right, so you've moved up to 46 to 6, 28 to 9,
Mr. Chairman?
slides up, and then Railroad Trails goes down to 11. Mr. Lewis?
I have a bunch of stuff I'd like to mention if I could.
Oh, well, sure. Different than what Mr. Lancaster brought up?
Some aren't. I broke up my comments into removals, promotions, and demotions. As far as removals,
More organized than me.
I agree with the number 6, the pedestrian crossing, because it's being built this month or next month. And the old number 9 has already been removed. That was the Linder, Franklin, and Pine. It's currently under construction.
Now, you got to work with Lancaster's
Sorry,
far
the
left,
new numbers, right.
far left numbers.
Okay, don't worry about the Linder, Franklin, and Pine. In case forget I mentioned it. I will come back to the Locust Grove, the number 12, because I had that in remove, but I want to change the category to a demotion, but I'll come back to that in a second. And the other removal, it's the old number 41. What's the new number?
40.
40. That's the Carlton Avenue. In the notes, it says that the school district rebuilt the sidewalk on the south side. So it doesn't seem like it's an issue anymore, according to the notes, unless I'm not understanding that correctly.
South side is built.
Yeah.
I don't know if they have any cleanup because it looked like it curtailed just a bit going into winter.
Okay. So is that project complete then?
Well, I don't know if they've got to come out and complete anything after the winter.
Okay.
But the sidewalk is poured. I don't know if they're doing anything further on the north side. I see that they've put the chain fence back in.
Mm-hmm.
There's a chunk of sod to be replaced at 1.5 Street. I don't know how that's gonna fill in, but
Okay.
it is substantially complete, if I can use that term.
Okay. So it sounds like we can remove that. from the
What number
list.
said?
The new
41?
number 40.
New number 40?
Is that right,
Okay.
Mr. Lancaster?
All right.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I believe that's the extent of my removals.
Okay.
As far as promotions, let's see. The one that Mr. Lancaster mentioned, Main and Williams pedestrian crossing, I agree, that's a good one to move up. The one that used to be next to it, the Washington Street, West 7th to Main, that one is the only sidewalk project that I found in the old downtown Meridian plan that hadn't been done yet. So I think that old number 30, was that the new number 29?
New 29?
That one should be moved up to press it to somewhere high as well.
10, 11, 12,
Sure, I'll take one of those.
15? Do you get points for the first 15? Like on the road project?
Yeah.
The top 15 get points.
So you want to make noon 29, 15,
Sure.
okay?
And
Got any
then-
other promotions?
Then the Stockenham crosswalk, that's a good one.
What number?
That was the one we already made
Yeah,
number
yes,
6,
yes.
Mr.
Oh,
Chairman.
6, okay, all right.
And you already did the East Third Carlton to Fairview, didn't you?
Okay.
Is that
No.
one? Oh, okay. I apologize, it's getting a little.
What number are you on?
The new 48, I'm trying to remember, I have that circled and I'm trying to remember why.
East Third Carlton to Fairview, extended
Yeah.
roadway, yada, yada, yada. improved,
Yeah.
Crossing.
I guess I'm not as organized as I thought I was.
So if I can,
Yes,
Mr. Lewis and
please.
Mr. Chair. So that one is actually phase 2 of a bigger project that looks to use Third Street as a pretty major thoroughfare connecting Story Park to Fairview Avenue. So they have, ACHD has it broken up into 2 phases. The first phase is actually in the 5-year work program. Still a few years out anyways, but at least from Franklin to Carlton is programmed, and then this section, Carlton to Fairview. This one's the more difficult of those 2 sections. There's a couple of structures that get in the way of it. I can go there in a map if you'd like, but this is consistent, as the notes say, even with the downtown Meridian neighborhood plan. The city actually did a plan with 6 Mile Engineering, probably a dozen years ago, to look at the East 3rd Street alignment, and this was the alignment that was chosen because 2.5 Street and where that intersects Fairview wouldn't cut it, and so we studied it and said this is the alignment for a 3rd Street as sort of that pedestrian bicyclist corridor between Fairview and Franklin. So I'll go to a map if you'd like to see that too.
No, that's good. That reminds me why I circled it is because it was also part of the downtown Meridian plan. And it, and in phase 2 of the one that's already programmed. So that's why I wanted to move it up also.
14 or 16?
Sure.
In or out with bonus points, buddy?
14's fine. And I believe that's the extent of my promotions. Now I have a bunch of demotions if you care to entertain those.
You have the floor.
There are a bunch that in the explanation say that they've been scoped by ACHD and a no-go decision was made. And I think those should be moved to the bottom of the list personally.
All right, what number?
Well, let's see. Yes, 11. Okay, the old number's 12, but 11. And then,
How far down the list you going?
You can put them at the, at the bottom as far as I'm concerned, but
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt again.
Go ahead.
What I'm gonna, instead of putting a number, I'm just gonna leave them in the same order they are with all, if this is where we're going with the scope no-goes. I'm gonna leave it, if 11 was ahead of 26, it'll just be, they'll all be at the bottom, but they'll all be grouped in whatever their current ranking is.
yeah, that's fine.
Okay, all right.
And then 17, let's see, 17 and 18 are also no-goes. Or, yeah, okay, and then it looked like 20 was also a no-go or a defer, I'm not sure what. Yes. And then there was the new 25 was also a no-go. And then 38 and 39 and 41 and 42, those were also no-goes. And I'd like to propose that we put the one that we were talking about earlier, the number 12. We add this to the deferral to the no-go, because if it already has a pedestrian facility, even though it's not what we would like, it is a facility, and it should be ranked higher than those that don't have any facility at all.
So the
in
new
my
12,
opinion.
you're going to do what with the new 12?
Put it down in this list of projects that are at the bottom in some
So
order.
it's the first no-go.
Sure,
Okay.
that works.
Best of the worst.
Yes.
All right.
Best of the worst.
Anything else on your report card, sir?
I don't believe so, or if there was, I've lost it.
All right.
I'm good
So-
for now.
Mr. Chair, and it's certainly, it's your list. I made all those changes up until 41 and 42, and I think
Oh,
maybe
sorry.
just a little bit of discussion on those, and I've got them flagged, so we can, again, if you want to move them to the end, they're pretty much there anyway, so I don't want to spend too much time on 41 and 42, and they're still on the list.
Yeah.
I think these are ones, though, that when I meet with Ian, are going to be higher on the school district's list. So even though ACHD said no, is that still in the best interest of our community to say, okay, well, we don't need it? I'm not saying we have to push back, but just saying we have other community partners that have identified this as important too. So I just want you to think about that before we move it to again, it's near the bottom anyway, so
Yeah.
it's not going to make a difference too much, but to just put it towards the bottom because ACHD scoped it, there's some concern from others in our community about doing something, especially those two locations. So
I'm okay with not moving those two that Caleb's highlighted.
Okay. Any other maneuvering?
by the way, I'm not going to read this back to you all. I'm making notes, but I'm not going to read it all back.
I think we got a handle on it.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, a question.
Yes, sir.
Number 32, I see in the notes,
32, the new
32, that it's going to be built in 2020. Is that one that's imminent that we can remove?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I know that was directed at you, but
That's fine.
yes, that one also is going into construction either this month or next month as well. So I would propose it similar to the 8th Street PED crossing. This one should come out too.
All right, we'll take 32 out. All right. Good work, Mr. Lancaster. Or excuse me, Lewis.
Yeah, give him the
I
credit.
had the right initial.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you have something to say.
I have a question. So, I know we've talked about this before. It's number 1 on the list, the McMillan sidewalk. And for some reason, I'm remembering that got built. And if so, that needs to come off the list too. But am I misremembering?
So, Mr. Chair, and we no longer have Commissioner Leslie on the commission, so I do believe, but I haven't actually walked it myself. I do believe, so if you recall, it was compacted gravel for months. 99% sure that it finally got paved, and I think that's done. Is there anybody else that knows in that area?
Right next to me.
Sean, yeah?
It did get paved. The only part that is not paved is right at the corner of that old Ada County parcel. Is the only part that's not paved now.
So if visually, that's this kind of at the intersection to get to the rest of the way to Maverick, and that is some of the request. If you recall, there's a gap
Yep.
in here that was, and then development has made some improvements there. So it was, yeah, this area still remains unimproved.
So we leave it on the list, Mr. Lancaster, to pick up that remaining section?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah, that helped, so thanks for the information.
okay.
I'm
Think
not
we-
sure it needs to still be number one, but
If it's gonna just wait for a developer to come along, why have it on it? Like it ought to be around 20 or 22 or something, so. Don't forget about it,
yeah, that makes sense to me.
but
All right, so you want to move 1 to 20.
It is prime for development.
Okay, another note, Mr. Hood.
So I want to make sure I got that one right, because I heard 20, 21, 22 somewhere in there.
20, we picked.
20.
Well, if it's lower than 15, that's fine, because it doesn't
Yeah.
get any points after 15.
Okay. Mr. Hood, looks like you have your numbers. Mr. Lewis, you have a motion that the maneuvers we've made should be approved?
So moved. The
Second from
maneuvers.
someone? Mr. Leclerc?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
How close to the 30 minutes that we'd estimated for that endeavor did we take, do you know?
You had about 25 minutes.
That's not bad.
We're getting better.
Okay, all right. So,
Yeah.
we have item 5B, what was moved to C, completed, right? Okay?
Yep.
Now we're moving on to 5D, Fairview Avenue, Locust Grove to Eagle draft scope. Mr. Lancaster, Mr. Kavner is back in the room. You remember your question?
I do. Yeah, so, Mr. Chairman and Councilman Kavanagh, so we were talking about you when you were out of the room. And we were discussing the February 25th work session, where apparently there was a decision made to draft a letter about bicycle and pedestrian facilities. So I expressed an interest to our commissioners while you were gone about wanting to know more about how that sausage was made and why and everything.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Kavner?
appreciate the question about the sausage being made, and as I recall from that meeting, we had a brief presentation with and again, I don't want to speak and say it was one person either, but I believe it was a request either by a council member or the mayor to send a letter. And Mr. Hood and I were kind of touching base on this because we think it maybe translates into the next item on our agenda, is how do we, from a process standpoint, make sure that things are landing on the city council's plate that impact you after you guys have had a chance to weigh in on it. And part of that is likely my fault, and not thinking as we were going into the conversation to say, whoa, let's take a step back and let's engage the Transportation Commission. This body's appointed by the mayor's office and the mayor. It's an extension of the executive branch. And so making sure that that office is also coordinating with staff, with all of you about these things is something that we just need to figure out. There wasn't any intention to usurp this process. I think is often sometimes the case as staff that have been to city council can attest. We sometimes head one way and a council member jumps down a rabbit hole, and 45 minutes later, we're making a motion on something. I'd like to think that we've gotten better about that, but sometimes we miss the mark. And I think kind of building a process checklist or a process approach that staff sometimes, when a council member is laser focused on what's in front of them, to have maybe somebody from staff that's able to see the forest from the trees to say, well, hold on, let's look at this. We've got a commission that's able to handle this. And then it's not just you. We as a body are guilty of that with lots of other commissions that we touch. And in part, I think it's because we're a responsive body. Questions get asked of us, we vote. Things make it on our agenda, we render a decision. That's our muscle memory. I can do a better job to make sure that when those things pop up, that I'm asking staff the questions, or likely can be able to be here like I've been many other times to speak about what direction or comments that this commission has had. So that's where it came from, is more of a jumping down a rabbit hole more than anything. I am happy to, if this body, the letter has not been sent out yet. I'm happy to work with the mayor and the council president to have this item added to our agenda tomorrow. If this body would like to have more time to noodle on it. I don't know, again, we are in a new normal with our new council, and in the past, sometimes the executive branch would inquire if the city council wanted to sign on a letter. Other times, the executive branch would just send a letter to a varying agency. Our current mayor is asking for more of that, which I think the council is responding to. So I don't know, again, if this body wanted to have more time to discuss it, and if the council wanted to place a hold. I don't know if that would necessarily stop any type of communication between the mayor's office and the highway district. That would really be a question better suited for the mayor or his staff. And I hope I haven't thrown anybody under the bus or put my foot in my mouth too much.
Okay. Question answered. Shall we, any follow-up or?
So, Mr. Chair, sorry, Commissioner Lancaster, Mr. Chair. So maybe, can we talk about that under the next agenda item, I think, a little bit more? I think this one, the Fairview Avenue project, will help us kind of understand maybe things that are of interest to you to be involved with, whether they're policy, whether they're projects, what those things are. So let me give you an example of how I'm trying to involve you a little bit more in what I do and day-to-day stuff. And if this is something you aren't interested in, then I know kind of where that line's at. And then you guys can talk about that more during the next agenda item. So I have in your packet and on the screen, not the entire contract or draft scope of work from ACHD, but basically the timeline and a rough description. I kind of gave you the description of it earlier. Widening Fairview, there'll be 9 lanes on the Fairview, 9 lanes on the Fairview legs and 7 lanes on the Locust Grove legs. It'll include widening of the Hickory Way intersection that's currently signalized, and the western terminus is near Stonehenge and Jericho. It doesn't quite go to Lakes Avenue, but roughly Stonehenge, Jericho. So I just wanted to get this out in front of you so you can kind of see what's going on, but I didn't include everything here. Really, the schedule was the main part here that I wanted you just to see. That's a pretty quick schedule for a project this big. We're going to be rocking and rolling on it. So might not have a whole lot of time. Again, this was originally scoped to be just an intersection project, and they're trying to design a whole mile of roadway widening in the same time frame, basically. So I did see, though, and I just didn't recall earlier, if you looked at the top, right-of-way is programmed right now anyways for 2022 and construction in 23 to be designed and constructed along with that intersection project. So that is the goal right now. They're both tracking kind of concurrently, although, again, separate project numbers, and they could be separated, but right now they're tracking together. I do want to take a minute, and there's really 2 things. If you have anything in the scope, I'll take comments on that, but that was more FYI. The things I really wanted to discuss with you are actually in exhibits, so let me pull those up here. So on 2 different exhibits, let me here. So again, the scope of the project is basically from Jericho, and there's 2 sheets. So this is Webb Avenue. So this is a new road that even in this area you don't see, but if you drive out there today, there's a brand new road and some sidewalk that is constructed along here. Here's the limits of the western limits of the project. Zoom in a little bit. Because I want to get your comments on a couple things. One, here's the intersection. Hopefully the resolution improves. There we go. One is the splitter islands. So right now, because again, it's 9 travel lanes plus bike lanes, wide as a pedestrian. Right now, there's splitter islands proposed. I believe it's 8 feet is the width kind of in here. Yeah. So basically, that would be your pedestrian crossing. So I don't know if you have any concerns with that, comments on that. I'll also just point out, I'm a visual person, so we don't get a whole lot of these in Meridian, but the left turns, the dual lefts are actually on, I guess that's the far side, not the near side. Yeah, far side, if you will, so as a pedestrian or a bicyclist that's walking your bike across this crosswalk, you're actually staged in between traffic, at least going the same direction. So in this instance, all the cars are westbound versus if you put the median island on this side, you'd have cars flying both directions. You'd have your left turn still right there that you say aren't necessarily flying by you, but you'd have vehicles in both directions and you'd be in the middle of that. So I don't know, Meridian, that we have too many, if any of those, where you have the median and the splitter island separating the same direction of travel traffic. But anyway, so any comments on, I don't have a real detail on that, but just from this, any comments on how that's initially being designed? Maybe not having a splitter, maybe not having a refuge area for pedestrians.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster.
if I can chime in, so if I recall, this looks similar to, and Sean, I may need your help here, but what ACHD did at Cole and Fairview? And remind me there, so Sean's nodding, just for the record, I guess a question for you, at that intersection and here, did you do a 2-stage pedestrian crossing using the island, the refuge? Yeah.
Commissioner Lancaster, as it's currently, timed as such, no. We have the pedestrian crossing such that you can get across all at one time. We don't currently utilize the median as a staging area, though certainly if someone were to get stuck out there because they crossed late or whatever, then they could, because there is push buttons still there. But right now, no, we just have it as in one stage, but certainly in the future that might change.
Mr. Lancaster, you got another question?
I don't, Mr. Chairman, I have a comment, Caleb asked for feedback on this, and my feedback is I'm supportive of this idea. It's not the first time ACHD's tried it. I don't have any qualms with the proposed design.
All right. Other comments? Mr. Hood has asked us for our input.
Can I just share one more, at least at the staff level, what we've talked about is again that, and I don't remember the dimensions, if it's inside curbs or what that dimension is, but roughly 8 feet. Some of our thoughts is, if I am a pedestrian or a bicyclist and I walk my bike and I'm not comfortable, just taking the bike lane or whatever, and do get in stages have to cross, how comfortable is that when my bike's 5.5, 6 feet long and there's 8 feet and cars are flying by at 40 miles an hour? The thought or request is going to be to ACHD, unless you guys don't like this idea. There's already a pretty good impact, and I don't know how the center lines, what impacts there are, but if you can pick up maybe a couple more feet, there's a pretty good impact on this corner anyways with the yogurts. Maybe pick up a little bit more to make that median, just so you can get even another foot would help a lot in the comfort level of some of those areas. So just sort of not engineers, but just practically, like, who'd really want to be caught? You are caught out there. So that's really the only comment we had at staff was, boy, that doesn't, if we can make that, it's not going to be inviting to cross 9 lanes of traffic, but whatever we can do to make that a little bit more.
What does the book say, Mr. Lewis?
Mr. Chairman, I think, just from memory, I think 8 feet is the desired minimum for a median refuge, and that's for a bicycle pulling like a kiddie trailer. I don't know the right term for it. But,
Close?
but I'm in agreement with Mr. Lancaster that this on the design in general, but I'm also liking the idea if we can squeeze another foot or 2, that would be better than 8 feet. So, but I'm okay with 8 if that's all we can get, but if we can get 9 or 10, that would be preferred, I would think.
How does that increase the cost of asphalt and whatever?
It depends where you have to take that foot or 2 from. I mean, if there's so,
Agreed.
yeah, so I don't have an answer to that.
So the suggestion is to widen that refuge zone, Mr. Hood?
It'd be a request for them to look at it anyways to see if squeeze, I think was the technical term used there, another foot or 2 out of it.
And if they studied trigonometry or geometry, they just put the bicycle at a diagonal and pick up a couple feet.
Or when the guy's striping it with his paint truck, just sort of veer over a little bit and then you have,
Do they still study geometry and trig in high school?
in a while, but I'm sure they do.
All right. Just saying. All right,
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I have one more comment about that topic, and I recognize that Commissioner Lewis and I are kind of nerding out right now because
Technical term.
technical term, yeah.
We understand.
We might be considered a part at least of, the technical expert makeup of our commission. But anyway, with that said, I'm probably not leaning towards encouraging a wider median. The bigger the intersection gets, the worse operations get, is the short answer, the short reason. So, think about your driving around. So the length of yellow time and the length of red time, the time that you can't use. So the bigger the intersection gets, the longer those get and the shorter time you have to use. So, a foot or 2 probably doesn't make any noticeable difference, but this is already quite a large piece of road. So if anything, I would want to squeeze a little bit, but if the feedback Caleb is looking for is, or the suggestion he wants to make is just to consider it, then I think that's fine. But, there's consequences that come with making things bigger and wider.
Mr. Lewis, you're just asking it to be considered.
Sure.
Okay. That'd make the two, I was going to say the two nerds.
Compatible?
But yeah. Two engineers compatible. All right.
So I'm sorry, are there any other comments on?
I do have one question. I wonder, Caleb, are we seeing the entire concept plan, or is there more of?
That's what I was going to just do is go through the rest of the corridor. So I didn't know if we were done at the intersection. I'm going to continue back to the east. So I will just point out one of the other things we talked about as staff. Maybe before I go east, I'll go west for a second. Maybe. Oh, there we go. So I kind of started over at Stonehenge, but we were looking at, well, can we even cross ped somewhere else than through here? Again, that throat is kind of to Commissioner Lancaster's point. Yeah, you got to add more walk time, the wider and wider this gets. So maybe we could even cross pedestrians, say at Stonehenge. But this is a public street, and then you'd essentially have to extend this median and do the same thing and basically put up a pedestrian signal and cross pedestrians here, and that didn't seem to make any sense because right now you're going to have people turning left into here, and that's a pretty good conflict too. So anyways, we looked at, does this make any sense? And it really doesn't. Maybe let me back up again. So we're looking at a 2-foot buffer, if you will, right to the bike lane. That's roughly 5 feet. This is where you're at Stonehenge. Then Fairview transitions from 2 lanes to 3. So here's where you pick up that third travel lane. Kind of go in the other direction, then you'd have that drop lane basically on Fairview at roughly the same point. I will note there's pretty significant impacts to the health club. You can kind of see this whole row of parking gets impacted pretty good. So, but again, you're looking at basically this is where it transitions to then a 3-lane through going all the way back to Eagle Road. So that's the cross section, basically, again, a 7-lane roadway with your dual lefts onto northbound and southbound Locust Grove, both directions, bike lane, and dedicated right turn lanes too on the Fairview legs. So then continuing down the corridor, pretty standard from that point. We kind of looked at the same thing, A-Vest or Webb. Could we cross people across Fairview there because of your crossing distance is substantially less, and it just doesn't make any sense. Couldn't fit it in at either place, and you don't have a forward leg intersection to really even monopolize that an intersection. So so that's one half of the plan to, again, roughly Webb. So this is my cut sheet. I'm going to match this in right here, basically. Hopefully, yeah, you can kind of see. Zoom. There we go. So again, same cross section. I think they're going to try to retain some of the existing. Sorry, I'm zooming around here. Again, you've got existing sidewalk now on Webb to, I think, roughly here or somewhere right in here. So that sidewalk exists. It will be detached. So that's nice. We're going to also ask them, you've got a nice detached sidewalk from Hickory, and I'm not quite there, but this is all detached sidewalk as well that I believe can be retained. And so we'll ask them to retain that detached sidewalk basically up to here, where then it will become attached, potentially detached if they have to remove it. Again, in this case, it made sense to have a bike lane instead of a multi-use facility. Just with the driveways, your land use out here, multi-use facility didn't seem to give us any benefit. So then continuing further to the east. So again, this intersection will have to be rebuilt. Here's where that 3rd lane today kind of opens up just past this driveway. There's the 3rd lane. So essentially, if you're eastbound, you have 3 travel lanes today on Fairview. They'll have to rebuild the northern leg, the Hickory leg there, to add that the westbound through leg in the bike lanes. I can show you a little bit more on that. So today you can kind of see the striping where that lane drops today, and the bike lane drops right in this area today. So they'll be carrying both that 3rd lane all the way through. You can kind of see with this green, sorry, not the green, I think it's the blue.
The green is the saw cut line.
Yeah. There's a federal aid project going on here as well, so that even adds a little bit to why won't it let me zoom in? Sorry. You can kind of see that, again, that drop lane. You're at that existing here. That sidewalk obviously on this property line here, so I don't think they're really touching anything basically on the south side of the road here. I think that can all remain, and your project limits basically on the north side are roughly in here where that saw cut begins. And then again, you purchasing, I think they have a lot of this right away, but they'll be purchasing right away here. We'll request that detached sidewalk. I talked today with Parks. This is actually a 10-foot wide pathway, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go east or west with that 10 feet. So I think they're good with just having it transition from here to a 5-foot detached through this undeveloped ag land. So anyways, that was a quick kind of run through of the project limits. So if you have anything on the scope of work schedule, on the cross section proposed, I already took some notes on the splitter island and pedestrian refuge design. But if you have any other comments, I will jot them down now.
Anything else from Mr. Hood?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Well, two questions.
Ask
I need to be careful to say A or 2 or 3 because you guys catch me when I exceed my.
You're wasting time, ask.
I Tough crowd today. So my first question is, so why 7 lanes here? So Caleb, you just mentioned how there's 3 lanes eastbound, east of Hickory, but, 7 lanes, I'm not it's not that I'm opposing 7 lanes, it's just why here? So why start here? It kind of makes sense next to Eagle Road, but, as far as I know, nowhere else on Fairview is 7 lanes, so.
So, Mr. Chair, Fairview on the east side of Eagle Road is also 7 lanes. I don't have it on here. I can go to the Google Maps, but it's not the first segment. And
Kind of, right?
Until records.
And I seem to remember a map that says, the final build-out for, ACHD's final build-out for Fairview is 7 lanes or something like that. So, I guess you have to start somewhere.
yeah, I will just to that point though. Right now the western terminus of that 7 lanes is Meridian Road. So the intersections that were redone with split corridor a couple of years ago. Right now the plans and the models don't show it going any further to the west. So it is only. And I don't know because I don't pay much attention to what the Boise segments are. I don't believe or know how much further. A lot of it was access management, so medians and trying to address some of those types of things, access and safety with medians instead of widening. But it has been in the plan for some time to have this section of Fairview 7 lanes. We can get into, again, some of the current, numbers as far as congestion and look at that, but modeling and even congestion today. I mean, I know it's a lot of roads in Meridian, but if you go out there at 5:30, it's backed up pretty good, particularly westbound. And in the AM, it does too. I mean, from coming out of downtown towards Eagle Road, it backs up frequently.
Mr. Chairman, my second question, I may have just missed this, but in the packet, it talked about install median islands, which I think is a fantastic idea. And I either didn't catch it or it's not on the displays you showed us, so.
So I'm sorry, I haven't had actually a chance. They shared these diagrams with me last week or the week before, so I haven't really had a chance to circle back with them. I noticed that too, so really the only medians you see are near those intersections, near the intersection at Locust Grove. So that's another question I had, because we did talk about some additional medians similar to what you have near the Eagle intersection, kind of mid-block. Some of that may just be, use the center turn lane for now and evaluate things later. That's one of my questions for them is why, we're not starting with medians more of this project. It's just at that intersection, so.
So, Mr. Chairman and Caleb, that might be any feedback on this is, I think some medians make sense in this area, particularly because it's, Eagle is right on the east end of this project, where there are access control medians already, so it it's already in the neighborhood, and this seems like as comfortable a place as any to continue it, I guess, so that.
Any other feedback for Mr. Hood on this project?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lewis?
I'm just wanted to echo what Mr. Lancaster was saying about the median islands and the access control. But the other thing I had highlighted from my review was the bullet on continuous lighting. That caught my attention. I know a couple of years ago we had a presentation from city staff on the benefits of continuous lighting, and I think this is the first project I've seen that's going to have that, and I'm in favor of that. I think it's a good thing.
Very good. Anything else, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, just
Kenny?
2 quick comments. Sort of as a follow-up on your comment about the medians versus left turns. Of course, with a 7-lane section, prevailing speeds are going to be relatively high, and making a left turn, a permitted left turn between intersections, and having to cross 3 lanes of oncoming traffic could potentially be a source of difficulty. And that may be a reason to say medians the whole way instead of allowing those left turns. But that brings up the question, if we're going to have medians the whole way, why do we need that full 12-foot center lane? So that's because that widens the whole section by quite a bit, adds to the cost and so on. I wonder if that concern ought to be considered up front. Do we want to put medians the whole way, and if so, narrow the section simply to, save on cost and right-of-way and so on. So that's point one. Number two, going back to our initial discussion, and this is kind of just a comment. If you look at this aerial view, you'll see everything is very spread out. And we look at this intersection, and we look at all the, that Locust Grove intersection, we look at all the accommodation that's being made for pedestrians, but the reality is in an area like this, you're not going to have a whole lot of pedestrians trying to cross this 9-lane, practically a freeway, not quite. There are pedestrians, but you got to walk a country mile to go any place out there, and so it's just not very enticing for pedestrians.
If I can interrupt,
Sure.
the new housing, apartments and condos that are being built on the south, east of Locust Grove and Fairview. So you are dropping in, help me, Mr. Hood, 500-600 units,
Several hundred, yeah.
several hundred units. I suspect that you would have some increase of pedestrians wanting to get to the shopping facilities north of Fairview and Locust Grove.
You'll have some, but I think just think about the sort of the psychological impact of crossing a street like that and on any regular basis.
Good point.
And, carrying groceries or something like that. Even people who live a quarter mile away from a shopping center there are likely to drive instead of walk.
Good point. Okay.
It's not that I'm not promoting walking, I am. It's just that it's the kind of
nine lanes.
atmosphere where you feel so exposed and so vulnerable that people just don't.
That's what Mr. Lancaster would say, more data to consider. Okay.
Right.
Good point, Mr.
Right.
McKinney. Okay.
Can I just, and I'm not trying to belabor it too much, but that's why really we were looking at Webb. Can we do something at Webb with a mid-block crossing, if you will, because that really, there is some real density happening here. And again, you don't have to cross all those auxiliary lanes. You're only crossing six in a center turn.
Lanes, yeah.
At least that's sounds a little bit more manageable than 9.
Well, Mr. Hood, would you be stopping traffic within
You need to have
really
protected.
close of Locust Grove and Fairview? And I think that impacts traffic from Eagle and Fairview?
It certainly would.
Yeah.
And that's why we didn't, at the end of the day, we were trying to make it a little bit more user-friendly or somewhat promote it, and we aren't going to design, at the end of the day, yes, you're still crossing. No matter what we do, it's going to be intimidating.
Okay. Anything else for Mr. Hood?
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Leclerc?
we're discussing medians. I'm looking at all these businesses, and having been in a small business before, some of these are not too small, but it seems like medians would make access to these businesses a lot more challenging. And so because the middle parts of the day when this isn't full of cars, if you've been out there in that area shopping for whatever reason, it's kind of nice to have that center lane and be able to go where you want to go instead of figure out how you get around the medians to get eastbound in a way that you can turn right into some of these businesses on the south side of Fairview. So I think I'd be not inclined to think that it would be a good idea to extend the medians any more than we see here. I think this is probably enough. So that's some feedback for what was discussed earlier. All I have.
Mr. Hood? You have a few notes?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Are we, commissioners, are we concluded with 5D? Mr. Hood?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
over here. If I can real quick, I just want to correct the record. That meeting that Commissioner Lancaster referenced was last week, and I was absent from that meeting. Not saying if I would have been there that things would have went any different. I was confusing it with the February 11th meeting where we talked about safety busing, and we had some other pathways questions. So my apologies for confusing the two, and I wanted to make sure at least you're aware there's at least a greater explanation as to why that conversation did occur.
Okay. All right. We good on 5D?
Mr. Chairman, if I
Third
can.
question?
A general comment on 5D. As I recall, Mr. Hood also asked if we're interested in things like this. And this is what I'll say, Mr. Chairman, is I think it appears that there's some interest from the commission in helping to shape the comments that might come from the city on a project. And I think that's okay to do. You know, me thinking of where I sit, I need to make sure that I don't give a project review sitting here, but I can help influence or help Caleb with the city's message as far as, you know, what comments come from the city. So I guess my point is that I think, Caleb, this went well. Mr. Chairman, this went well, and I'd be open to, you know, if Caleb comes to us again and says, these are some questions or ideas that we're thinking of commenting, you know, commission, what do you think? I think that's appropriate and welcome as far as I'm concerned. That's my general comment.
Well, that's a good segue into 5E.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Shall we close 5D then, Mr. Hood?
The blind squirrel gets a note.
Okay. We'll close 5D. 5E is in Edward. Future role of the Transportation Commission. Mr. McKinney and I spent an hour with the mayor last Tuesday, and we can comment on that. And then I did the presentation to City Council on the year-end report, and I carried the message that we were asking for more activities to occur, more transportation related. I have some notes, but I thought I would let Mr. McKinney give his overview of how our meeting went with the mayor.
I think the meeting went very well, and the mayor was interested in this commission having a somewhat broader role. At the same time, recognizing the limitations on the fact that, you know, decision-making authority on a wide variety of issues is vested in the city council, and the commission is still just an advisory body. And of course, that's been the part of the concern that we've had and what we've dealt with along the way. My recollection is that one of the, and I did not actually bring my notes from that meeting, but one of the primary areas in which this commission and the mayor is interested in seeing this, and Caleb was with us as well and can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are a number of aspects in which, for example, where this commission can be involved to a greater extent. One thing that we asked for example, and discussed was this commission giving input on transportation-related aspects on new development projects that go before the Planning and Zoning Commission. But the Planning and Zoning Commission, traffic and transportation and those issues usually aren't at the top of their mind. Those aren't the primary things they're looking at necessarily, and there could very well be transportation-related issues that we might spot. And so the mechanism is, how that could work out is still being discussed. But this commission could be given an opportunity in the future to take a look at development proposals before they go to planning and zoning, and perhaps give our 2 cents initially. Likewise, on some of these projects, and this is one of the issues that I pointed out, was that the city council and planning and zoning rely upon the input of ACHD and other expert agencies to give decisions on transportation and traffic-related issues. But there are times when it might be desirable to have another set of eyes looking at the results of what ACHD recommends, because it is not inconceivable, and in my opinion, it's happened on occasion where there have been some issues, some lapses or some issues with the final conclusions or opinions of Idaho Transportation Department or ACHD regarding a particular project and its transportation-related issues, that this commission might have been able to spot or might have been able to give some helpful input that at the very least could have been considered by planning and zoning and ultimately by the city council. So that's one aspect of a greater role that we've talked about. The mechanics of how that will come about are still to be determined, and that's, but that's part of the discussion that we're having now.
Right.
It's how to make that happen.
So I'll spin ahead to the presentation, year-end presentation. And my focus was initially, or the initial focus was by design or luck, I'm not including myself, this commission has some very talented people, and the ex-official members as well. But as it stands, I think there's a fair degree of expertise, technical expertise as well as practical expertise. And so I recognized each one of the commissioners here and even highlighted the role that the youth commissioners play, because that got me into what I said or saw, and we have seen, are another set of eyes. Mr. McKinney referred to that. I put it in the category of unintended consequences. And that is, we've seen, and I use the example of subdivision plans where it's all designed for kids to walk to the bus drop, bus pickup, bus stop. The parents want to protect the kids. They get the safety issue, but they clog the roads parking. Okay? Now that presents a traffic. We also, with the HOA, they designed the school and the exit was to go one way, but they put it another way, and it got away from facilities. I said the unintended consequences, students not wanting to park in the parking lot. All right. So what I said there was, using that backdrop as unintended consequences, is practically speaking, we see an issue that's developed, project matured, just over a passage of time, the path of least resistance. And I'm saying, if we had had the opportunity, or if a body such as ourselves had the opportunity to look at something like that, and again, drawn on the expertise here, can we make a suggestion on the front end? And we've voiced that variously, here's a problem, or there's a problem that existed from the beginning. And I don't want to sound arrogant. So I left it out there and said we would like more on our plate, an expanded role. And they said, are you really, really sure you're speaking on behalf of the other commissioners? Are you really, really sure that, because we're going to ask you to do more work. Are you really, really sure that that's the message that they sent you with? And I said, yes. And the short on that is, if the role is expanded, again, I should digress for a minute. I was talking about its transportation-related projects. And I said, I get it that there's been a couple of issues that go through, and it may have been a timing issue, that it was in between our meetings, but it needed to be considered by city council, so we weren't involved. Well, the easy fix to that one is, I got to restart. Well, they go, if it's an expanded role, the more responsibilities, would you meet twice a month? Okay, and so, again, they said, are you really sure? And I said, well, they sent me here with the task to ask for the responsibility and be careful what you pray for, because you just might get it. So, that's in the offering. Now, Mr. McKinney discussed this generally, and at an executive level and at a legislative level and at the legal level, what role would we play? Would it be on the very, very front end where we're making general comments? And those comments go to staff? Those comments could be reviewed by other agencies? Or would we be on the tail end? And I don't know, because it all depends on legal parameters, as I said. Would we be another agency that well, the far extreme is, would we be an agency where they got to get our stamp of approval? And so, in talking with the city council, and I did have Brent Strader and Hoagland very engaged. We've started the conversation both at the executive level with the mayor and at the legislative level with the city council, saying, is there a larger role? Did emphasize that we're not asking to usurp. I heard that verb earlier, and I like that better than the one I had. We're not asking to usurp or overrule another agency. We're not asking that our expertise surpasses any other expertise. We're not trying to create a turf war, if you will. One other thing I want to throw in the mix, and I did emphasize that as a Transportation Commission, we just don't discuss cars. We discuss all modalities of movement. Walking, pathways, bicycles, even rail, some transit. So if there's a modality to move people in freight, we want to discuss that. So the focus is simply not on, building roads, building bigger roads. And, can you do some economies of still moving people and meet your policies and your mandates? Okay, so, again, you really sure you want to ask for more work, Ballard? And I told him, well, I think that's what the commissioner sent me to do. We'll see how I fare next Monday when I tell him. I don't see us necessarily as being a hurdle for developers to clear. But I think, again, with the expertise and the practical experience, we can look at a plan and maybe see. And I used Mr. Lewis's talking about whether, they want a 10-foot lane, and you go, nah, you can get by with an 11-foot lane and choke down, within acceptable rules, choke down the sidewalk, okay? And so those are the kind of comments. One, before I forget, Mr. Hood, he will be, you didn't announce this, Mr. Hood, you're starting a new role, and so he's going to ask at least the chairman, if not one other commissioner, to be more involved in setting the agendas or ordering the agenda, and I signed off on that. So that's a very broad overview.
Sound like a broken record, but they said, you're really sure you can speak on their behalf that you're committing them possibly to 2 meetings a week, or a month, and a little more homework? And I said, well, I think that was what they asked me to do. We didn't specifically discuss that expanded time commitment, but again, if we're asking to take a bigger bite, gonna need a little more time to chew. And twice a month coincides with P and Z meeting twice a month. And again, I want to avoid friction, or at least that's how I projected it, to avoid friction between any agencies, or if that's the right term, any divisions, and being another set of eyes. And I think we've demonstrated by our conversations over the last several years that one of the comments was, I was in an interview with fill a vacancy here. And the individual said, well, I watched the meeting and I was surprised, Ballard, that you suspended the Robert Rules of Order. And I said, well, we're not too serious about it, but we get the job done. But I said, I said, we have some mature people up here that know how to have a conversation and get it done. And really, I said, that's pretty much how we operate. It wasn't a stretch to just say we're going to suspend the rules. To me, it was pretty much business as normal because we had a fair conversation. Okay, so that's where we're at. We haven't defined how we're going, where we get stuck in the process. It takes some fair legal considerations. Is it still advisory? Or somehow we become part of the record? That's where lawyers start thinking. Mr. Hood.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you and the Vice Chair did a fine job, and thank you for, by the way, for presenting to Council last Tuesday, the end of year report. Just a little finer point on some of those things, and then I'll open it back up. So I did engage with Mr. Baird after our meeting upstairs with the mayor and just said, hey, heads up, I don't know if the rest of the commission's going to want to do this and get into the development review or not, but can you start kicking it around, what that might look like? 2 meetings, legality, where in the process? Is it public hearings? Is it review? And how do we provide our comments? Or is it, do we have to take public comment? What does that look like? So I'm not trying to put him on the spot, just letting you know that the wheels are starting to turn there a little bit. If there's more momentum for that, I imagine they'll have to probably get more serious about what that looks like in a process, establish a real process for that. But I just wanted to let you know, I've already kind of at least gave them a heads up that there's some potential there for what you guys just mentioned. Agenda setting, thank you for covering that one. I want to clarify, my position is not changing. I do have an open position, so if you really want to get into this stuff, there's a job out there on our website right now, and you're all qualified, so I'll at least give you an interview. But we are asking for some help, some more staff to look at. Really, that person is a transportation coordinator and education coordinator. It's a planner position, but we will accept engineers and planners, and so look at that job description. Or if you know of someone that might be interested, small plug for that position. So, yeah, but if you really want to get more than twice a month, you could be daily here at City Hall. So we did, and you briefly mentioned it there when we were talking about freight and other modalities. We briefly spoke about transit as a priority. So I'll put a pin in that, but there was a good conversation. I thought it wasn't long, but a good conversation about where we are as a community with transit being a priority. So for another time, just because we're running out of time, but we did briefly talk about that. Police department and having them try to, again, time allowing, and if there's not a real life safety emergency, getting in the habit of vetting those things through the Transportation Commission. Some of those projects that I even brought to you. And the last thing I just wanted that you didn't bring up that I wanted to give you a heads up this next year, probably likely after the legislative session, kind of depending on what they do with property taxes and how much resources we may have at our disposal to partner with ACHD largely, but even ITD to a certain extent. the mayor, and I think this, council, this discussion hasn't fully been had with this council, but the last council was interested in advancing transportation projects. So the mayor mentioned a couple corridors, north-south being Locust Grove and Linder, and east-west being Black Cat, Victory, and Ustick. So he's probably going to ask you to say, hey, of the projects that ACHD doesn't have in their program now, if you had to pick 1 to 3 of them and go loan ACHD the money or even contribute a couple few $1,000,000 to them to make them go, what would be your top 1, 2, or 3 projects to say, here ACHD, make it happen sooner? So that's coming too. So that's a future meeting topic type of discussion, but that I thought was interesting to hear, and I'll bring that back with more details at a future meeting. But that was just one more I want to just add to that, and so thank you.
Okay. I see we're approaching 5:30. If we have conversation, questions, do we want to extend for 10 minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we extend the meeting for 10 minutes till 5:40.
Okay? So questions about, well, excuse me. Any
Second.
opposed? Second. All right. All in favor? Aye.
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 All right. So, you gotta like Roberts. Okay. Commissioners, Mr. McKinney, did I leave something out, or?
No, I don't think so. And I would just like that. I think it would be worth going one by one down the line and letting each commissioner just give their, how do you feel about this whole concept of potentially expanding the scope of what we're doing as a Transportation Commission? Because it'd be nice to know the feelings of each member of the commission on that.
Very good. Louis?
Mr. Chairman, I'm generally in favor of what I heard you and Mr. McKinney talk about the expanded role of the commission. I like the idea, especially of dipping our toe in development review a little bit, just to see what's going on. A lot of time, what I see is, like, for an individual development, people are laser focused on that one development. What impact is that single development going to have on the transportation system around it? But the bigger picture gets lost.
Very good.
I know when I see the information come on new developments, I know the Compass has they're asked for input. But what I would like to see is, well, from this area that's being developed, what are the trips, I guess, that are being proposed? What's the maximum that you could get from the current zoning, and what's the maximum you can get from the future land use map? Because those are 3 different numbers you can get. And when a certain development goes greater than what was planned, that might not be a big deal. But when you have the 10 or 20 surrounding developments all going over what has been projected in the past, that's going to be a big problem, because all of the long-range planning that Compass and ACHD and ITD do are based on a certain number of trips. So that's just one thought that came across my mind while I was listening to your.
Very good. Mr. Lancaster?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I think that you and Commissioner McKinney represented the commission very well. So thank you for doing so.
You're welcome.
So I have been a squeaky wheel at various times over the last 8
I didn't name
years.
you by full name. But R.L. popped up a couple of
Yeah,
times.
sure. And so I'm very encouraged by what both of you are reporting to us, from what councilmen, from what Mr. Hood. I'm very encouraged. I volunteered a few months ago to do more. So yes, I'm still willing to take on more. So in response to that, I think more homework is appropriate for us to take on. I'm less anxious to jump into 2 meetings a month, and I don't mean that because of me. I would make it work. And I think we volunteer commissioners would probably make it work, right? We're here because we want to be civic-minded, we want to be involved, that stuff. My concern deals more with everybody that's sitting down at floor level and Mr. Baird. You know, we have several agencies that are very generous with their time and being here, and I don't want to impose on either, you know, our ex officio members or city staff, Mr. Baird, Mr. Hood, Councilman Kavanagh. You know, so my comment about being tentative about 2 meetings is more trying to be, you know, recognize the time that others are contributing, not so much mine. So that would be my hesitation there. So I think, you know, there needs to be a real close look at the, you know, at that. But that would be my only caution. But like I say, I'm very encouraged from what I'm hearing. So thank you.
Do we break there and ask Mr. Martin what, that crowd your plate for another meeting a month?
Commissioner Ballard, I think it'd be something we'd have to talk about at the Highway District to see what our role would be if the Meridian Transportation Commission were to go to twice a month and reviewing development applications, and exactly where, you know, would you guys look at that after we already looked at it and commented, or would it be before? So I think there's some of those things we'd have to work out.
That was part of the conversation of where in the process do you fit? Very good, I appreciate that. Mr. Kavanagh?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'll start my comments. If this is where this body wants to go, I think council would support that. We want to support where this commission wants to go and how they want to be involved. You don't have city council, though, typically attend planning and zoning hearings. And really, when you start moving into land use, that starts to be a really sticky thicket with city council. You want us acting as a body on the record collectively. And again, I think you guys can figure out the details to make it work. I look at the city council, we made an evolution in our meetings about 6 months ago. We have our workshop meeting and our main meeting. And maybe this body has a workshop meeting that is focused on a lot of what you've kind of done traditionally, and then, you know, maybe a work meeting or a main meeting that is focused solely on the land use piece. And perhaps for that land use piece, it wouldn't require as much involvement from the ex officios. Typically, the comments that we're going to see in an application that comes from the ex officio members, you're not going to receive anything different before you than what would come before planning and zoning. So their role would wouldn't need to be as involved as you would typically have in a main meeting. So that would be a suggestion that we would maybe want to work out, so that in respect to the time of them, and quite frankly, I always try not to look at, not just with this body here or myself, but what does this look like, 10 years from now? And I think that me today, I could be quiet and mum's the word and participate without having to provide any comment. But I also think about how I would be 6 years ago when I was brand new to the council and just wanted to jump in and engage on everything, and quite frankly, got myself into a little bit of trouble. And I don't want that to happen to a new council member as well. So I think that as a body, we support whatever direction you guys want to go. It's just a matter of managing the details so that we don't put the city at risk.
Okay. Ms. Taysom?
Currently, at Valley Regional Transit, we already do provide significant comments on like development reviews, that sort of thing. As far as like my current schedule goes, it's something that I can squeeze in if you guys do decide to go to 2 meetings a month. I don't have any personal objection to it.
Okay. Mr. Price?
In general, Mr. Commissioner, I would say that ITD weighs in pretty heavily on most developments as long as we're allowed to look at them beforehand, so my office does a lot of that review. I do like the comments of possibly having this other meeting, maybe not involving me if it's possible, but then if there are specific occasions where it would be helpful, I'd like to know about those and attend. My time does become a crunch often, but we're happy to make arrangements to be
And
helpful.
from a lawyer's perspective, I could see what we call conflicts. you already weigh in on
Right.
the projects. You know, we wouldn't want to taint that with having you, you know, somehow involved. And that goes for Ms. Tayson and Mr. Martin.
Yeah.
Very good. Ms. Tisdale?
My thought may be to, I totally agree with what y'all said and the direction you're going. I think maybe for the ex officio members, allowing some flexibility in who attends. Sometimes I'm probably not the right person to be here, and so another member of their staff could be a better fit for certain things. So maybe, you know, where the rules are written right now that, you know, if I don't come so many meetings a year, we get penalized for that or cut or whatever happens. But maybe make it a flexibility of the agency being the ex officio member instead of a person, so that we can fill those positions with different people as appropriate.
Very good, very good. Shulaki?
So, I think I liked what I heard about expanding the commission's role as an advisory council. I especially liked bumping it up to 2 meetings a month. I thought that'd be a good idea to get more work done and hopefully keep these meetings from drawing out as long. That is assuming it works with everybody's schedule. I had a question on, do we know exactly when it would be if we decided to follow through?
That's open, because the conversation just started. Where I left it with city council, I said, thank you. Conversation has started. We look forward to the next conversation. Nothing's set.
Okay.
They were receptive to having a conversation, and I thought that was positive.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, that's where I'm at. I think 2 meetings a month especially would be good for me, assuming that does work for everybody involved.
Mr. Leclerc?
Well, you said I'd be pleased, and I am. I'm real pleased that we're going down this road, and it's a great direction for the commission to take. My background, as you may remember, is in planning and zoning with the county, and it's I don't think it's a big difference to them to add another commenter to their list when they notify the public. I mean, they'll notify. The Department of Environmental Quality at the state, the Fish and Game Department of the state. Whenever a subdivision goes in, there's a wide net that goes out to get comments. In the county, we deal with the National Guard sometimes. We deal with the cities because it's an area of impact overlap. There might be times when the city's Planning and Zoning Commission would invite the county's planning department to comment on a proposal. So I think this fits. I think we can do this and not slow down a process or make anything more expensive for developers. That should be a goal. I don't think we want to, make this something that makes a 6-month approval process take another month. We don't want to get into that.
Sure.
So those are good. Respecting turf and all that, but to be able to engage in comment seems good. Maybe the way to structure the 2 meetings would be to have a regular meeting and a second meeting if there are development proposals for us to look at. If there's not, we don't meet. But if there is, then we may look at 2 or 3 of them that are before the Planning and Zoning Commission. So this, I think, is a doable thing. Then I'm eager to engage in it. A second meeting a month would be okay. We may not need it every month, but I think it'd be fine to have it planned.
We're about out of time. I don't want to cut you off, Mr. McKinney. Mr. Hood, one thing that dawned on me, I didn't identify or ask what the next step is. It's not that we just leave it out there. I don't know who's going to knock on my door, or am I or someone else from the commission expected to knock on somebody else's door?
So, Mr. Chair, and again, I've engaged already with our legal team. I wanted to hear that first, and I think that at least you all are open to how it, potentially if we put this on your plate, to dealing with it. And I think we really do need to take a deep dive both legally, what can we do? Because it's the city. We're not just another state agency. It's within our own house, and we already have two other bodies that hear these projects. But there's several next steps, but I think that's the next one, is to get a general framework of how this could work. We also need to get generally with ACHD. I'm not so worried about ITD, but ACHD, and how does this fit into their process? What does it look like before? Does it make sense more before versus after? So I think those are probably the two biggest next steps, is to coordinate with our agency partners, primarily ACHD, but also Compass and ITD. And then also from a legal perspective, what can we do and what shouldn't we do or can't we do? Again, public hearings versus a public meeting, and are we taking testimony on these things? Is it just, we'll send you a packet and you discuss? So let us kind of maybe start to put some sideboards on it a little bit more, and we can kind of figure out where that goes. Does that sound okay to everybody?
So we'll wait to hear back from you?
Yeah, I would say an update next month, at least with, for the next standing agenda item for the next several months, and we'll kind of piece this thing together.
Okay, because if you wanted us to be doing something, that's what I was asking.
I don't think right now.
Okay, all right. So 5E, commissioners, you didn't throw me under the bus. I understood my instructions. Thank you. Future meeting topics: Harvest Transit, default speed, signs, idling, transportation components of the comprehensive plan, Main King Crosswalk. You brought that up, Mr. Lancaster. Master mobility. Okay, our next meeting is April 6th. Before we close, anything else?
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to call your attention to the staff communications. There are some updates in there that I'd like you to at least peruse through. I'm not going to make you read it, but please look at the staff communications. There's some good stuff in there.
Very good. Okay, next meeting, April 6th. Stand adjourned?
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
Where's my little
Second.
hammer? Oh. All in favor? All right.
Aye.
Okay.
I think that was a motion.
Now, I need to sign the minutes, Mr. Hood.
Yeah, I didn't print them. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Takes care of itself.
Yeah, unfortunately.